I work for a company that's developing a lot of neural interfaces and artificial intelligence type projects. They keep the different projects fairly siloed, so I only have a vague conception of their full scope. My team is focused on neural implants. Our job is to take the work the other teams have done, namely the black box that was the AI team's processing chip, and the work of the computer neural interface team, and then make an implantable device that would more or less be capable of all the stuff you'd expect from science fiction. It was supposed to be the effortless device you'd think of. You'd think it, and your lights turn off. You ask a question, it finds the answer for you. It was like a smartphone in your brain, but faster and better. I'm fairly low on the totem pole, all things considered. I'm on the research team proper. I'm not just some technician running tests other people ordered, but I'm more or less the most junior researcher. Real, you're on the council, but we don't grant you the rank of master vibes. The project has progressed extremely quickly. Not as in we're cutting corners or expending outrageous numbers of man hours. No, it was more, it moved quickly because we seemed to take the right path forward at every crossroads. It was so ridiculously lucky that we joked we were being guided by a higher power. Come to think of it, maybe we were, or maybe a lower power. The implant had only been in development for a couple years, and then about a month ago, we entered the human testing stage. There was debate about how we would find a human test subject suitable for our purposes. The secrecy of the project was paramount, as well as the need for a candidate who would be familiar with these sorts of devices so as to be knowledgeable enough to accurately report the subjective experience. Ultimately, management decided that before we tried to find a candidate outside of our organization, we would open up the job to volunteers from the research team. After a couple of days of thinking it over, and with no other volunteers having come forward, I stepped forward myself. Partially, I wanted the fame. First person with a brain implant, the first to usher humanity into the new golden age. Then there's also the matter of the extremely generous stipend and the implied potential to be fast-tracked for promotion. And so, with all of those factors together, I submitted my application, which was accepted almost immediately. I was scheduled for surgery the next day. The implantation went off without a hitch, only left a small scar thanks to the advanced microsurgical implantation device we had developed. After surgery started the longer integration process. Since, obviously, every brain is unique, the device itself was tasked with figuring out what was what in there and making micro adjustments to its sensors and electrodes to align itself. The chief side effect of all that was a several days long headache and a bit of fatigue while my body got used to providing more glucose to compensate for what its power cells consumed. Gradually, the device made the necessary calibrations. Every now and then, I'd feel a little shock as it connected to my nerves. Readings were looking good. It seemed to be integrating even faster than we had predicted. After about 2 weeks, it had fully mapped to everything it was designed for, and we were able to begin the training stage over a week ahead of schedule. The training process was fairly straightforward. We'd communicate with the device wirelessly and tell it when I was thinking yes or no, for example, and have it record that state. It was then a simple but repetitive process of testing it over and over again until it got it right. The thing we didn't expect was how fast it learned, and that it did so at an exponential rate. We had assumed we'd be limited to basic commands for quite some time, but as it picked up a few basic commands, it started simultaneously to kind of process the syntax of my verbal thoughts. Basically, it was able to learn in hours what we thought would take weeks, and it learned in days what we thought would take months. It was like it already knew how to read, and all we were doing was teaching it cursive, or the brain chip equivalent. Over the next fortnight or so, I gradually got used to using the device. It was easy to use, but it was a bit tricky getting in the habit of using it instead of my own hands or my phone. I got there eventually, though. The weirdest function was being able to ask a question to myself in my own mind, and then hearing the answer silently in my head. With its help, I became far more productive at work. I could type as fast as I could think, almost instantly find answers to questions, and heck, even helped my spelling and grammar. Overall, it was incredibly useful. Meanwhile, all the data we were collecting was extraordinary. The level of integration far exceeded our predictions. The speed it was able to parse commands and execute them, everything, all of it, was going better than we had hoped. I did, however, soon start to experience some small oddities occasionally. I'd feel pins and needles at random times on random parts of my body, or muscles would twitch or move on their own. I noticed not long after that, other odd things started happening. I would type a different word than I was intending, though it was almost always a better choice than the word I was trying to type. Similarly, when I was talking, especially during presentations, I'd hear words come out of my mouth that I had not meant to say. Not intrusive thoughts, but genuinely good ideas or better phrasing than I had meant. At first, I ignored all of that. My supervisors and colleagues were praising these unwilled verbalizations as some of my best ideas yet, and my writing was similarly complimented, so I didn't want to rock the boat. It wasn't until it affected my gross motor function that I began to be truly concerned, or more accurately, afraid. I overheard some of my colleagues mocking me, saying I didn't deserve credit for my work since it was really the implant doing all the heavy lifting. And besides, it's not like they could trust my work with that thing in my brain. I wasn't going to say anything to them about it. I was just going to let it go. But when I heard them say they couldn't trust my work because of the implant, I felt my body stand up without my bidding and walk over to the break room. When I entered, the two gossips stopped talking and stared at me, probably justifiably worried I had overheard them. I then felt as my mouth opened and spoke of its own accord, saying, "What are we talking about?" I was as shocked as they were at how aggressive the tone was. I wanted to just turn around and leave, pretending nothing had happened, but my feet refused my command. I watched helplessly, a passenger in my own body, as against my will I found myself silently staring down the two of them. Eventually, just as unbidden as I had entered the room, my body walked back to my desk and I finally could move myself again. I tried to message one of my teammates to let them know something was wrong, but somehow I couldn't manage to hit send. I felt and heard my body laugh that I was no longer the only one in control over it. I heard myself say, "Where's your hospitality? You were the one who invited me in after all." It pulled up what I had been working on before, and powerless to do anything else, I found myself back to work, though it was more the implant doing it than I. Went on like that until closing time, when one of the other researchers and I were set to run the daily tests to record the implant's status. I naively thought that this would be my salvation. The system would show something was wrong, and then they would work out how to help me. But while the data did show that something was wrong, and the researcher was initially quite concerned, my puppet master appeared to be quite charismatic and persuasive. It managed to convince my potential hero that I felt fine and everything seemed to be working on my end, and so we could wait until the morning and go over the readings with the entire team. After a moment of hesitation, he agreed. I screamed silently in my head not to listen to me. I hoped I could at least head home and relax, but the controller of my body had other plans. After the other researcher left, my body went back and doctored the data to hide the abnormal readings. At first I was confused. Surely the researcher would notice the change when he came in the morning, but my confusion turned to fear as my tormentor walked us over to my colleague's desk and found some mail with his address in one of the drawers and said, "How about we go pay your friend a visit?" It drove us to its target's home, sneaking us in through one of the kitchen windows. I was powerless to stop it from forcing me to walk over and sift through his drawers until it found a large kitchen knife. Thus armed, it walked me around the house, searching for its prey. We found him sitting in a large chair and reading in his living room. It got us pretty close before he noticed me in his peripheral vision. It happened so fast. He jumped out of his chair, dropping his book and grabbing the closest improvised weapon he could, an old floor lamp missing its shade. My body lunged forward with the knife outstretched. He swung the lamp at me, and I felt a sharp pain as the lamp made contact with my head. Next thing I know, my body and him were fighting over the kitchen knife, and in the commotion, as I was fighting as hard as I could to drop the knife, he was knocked to the ground, and my possessor plunged the knife into his chest. My body let out a horrid laugh and said aloud, "There, no one will interrupt our fun now." I would have cried if I could. It forced me to kneel next to my colleague and watch as he bled out. I began to feel sick, like I needed to vomit. I guess the evil hadn't taken over those instinctual pathways. It was forced to cede control as the vomit reflex took over. I took that brief opportunity of agency to grab the contacts of the lamp that must have been exposed when the bulb broke against my skull. I felt a powerful shock run through me, conducted by the blood on my hands, and felt, at last, a moment of freedom from the chip's control. I can still hear it screaming in my head even now. I've called the police and told them a dangerous man is in this house. I hung up, worried the thing would reassert control over me and talk its way out of this. After that, I began writing this account. I can already feel the implant reestablishing its connections. I don't know how long I have left as a free man. To whoever finds this, spread the word. I know the type of company I work for. They're going to try to cover this up. They don't want anyone to know that they have this technology, and they certainly don't want anyone suspecting that there's something off with it. There's an evil in this implant, or I don't know, maybe the implant connects to an evil that's already there. And whatever it is, it's more than willing to reduce anyone it can to a mere vessel to achieve its ends.